In 1985, some of you may remember that year, 1985, I was living the American dream, or reasonable facsimile. We lived in a picturesque small town, so picturesque in fact it was used as a backdrop in various TV commercials. We lived on a quiet street, a little cul-de-sac with private single-family homes, wide yards, had the mother, the father, c'est moi, and 3 healthy and happy children. For the sake of the story, we'll put the emphasis on the healthy. Everybody was doing well. And then one day, my youngest member of the tribe came home and with a note from his teacher. It said that they'd had an eye test in school that day, and that they thought we ought to have Danny tested and see if he needs glasses. Well, I've worn glasses my whole life, and we got away without needing them for the first 2 kids, so it was due. No problem. Took him to the village optometrist. Optometrist examined him, came out, and said, I can't give your son glasses. Said, he's developing cataracts. You really need to see an ophthalmologist. Oh, all right. So we called the insurance company, found out where was the nearest ophthalmologist. Now, for those of you who are a little fuzzy about cataracts, what they are is the lens of your eye is like a little pillow, transparent, filled with gel, and it expands and contracts as you focus. When that gel becomes a solid, it becomes opaque, and used to be, not that long ago, one of the leading causes of vision loss as it expands. So I was a little concerned about this, but I'm doing something. We went to the next town where the ophthalmologist was. The appointment was late in the afternoon. The days were getting short, so it was getting dark as we went over the mountains and through the woods. And it was a little eerie as we went into the office there. We went upstairs. He was examined. We came back out, and the doctor said, well, his in the right eye, it's covering about 1/3 of the right eye, and we can see it developing in the left. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. We have to remove both lenses. Now, how long did it take me to tell you that? About 20, 30 seconds. He then launched into a 15-minute discussion of how we were going to pay his bill and all the different plans he had. And I thought, didn't come here for that. And while he was talking about the money, I noticed his hand was trembling a little bit. And I said I would not let this man cut a cake, much less get near my son's eyes with sharp instruments. So as we left, I told my wife, I will find another doctor. Now, the little picturesque town we lived in was 2 miles north of New Jersey, and every day I commuted into Manhattan to work for the Veterans Administration. And so I had contacts among medical professionals, and I went over and I asked around, and was directed to the person that was the most highly regarded pediatric ophthalmologist in New York City. And I called her up and made an appointment. Now her office was in a townhouse on the Upper East Side. And we arrived there, and you walk up the stairs, and it's laid out like an ordinary townhouse. And the waiting room was right in front of you, and then behind, where there would be 2 bedrooms, she had her examination room over here, and on the right, she had a tree with macaws and green parrots and like that behind a glass wall, which I thought for a pediatric practice was probably a pretty good thing, because the kids would get excited about coming to see Dr. Parrott. She gave them the exam. Now, when that was finished, she started talking to us. She was one of those people that when you talk to them for 30 seconds to a minute, you know she knows what she's talking about. She had the confidence, she had the authority, she just knew. She said that it's covering about 50% of the right eye, maybe 20% of the left, and we're going to have to remove both lenses. But I'm only going to do one at a time, because we don't want him to have both eyes bandaged and leave him in the dark. So we're going to do one at a time. She then explained that there are 3 kinds of people who get cataracts. First group are the elderly, that as you get old, like Jessica mentioned, things wear out. And the second group are infants. And having worked in a hospital myself, I know that it's very hard to make a perfect baby. Sometimes they come out with little things like that. The third group is situational, which is generally illustrated with welders who stare into that white-hot torch all the time, and they develop cataracts. They can also injuries, illnesses, so forth. But she said it doesn't happen in children your son's age, who's like 8 years old. She said, we don't have spontaneous cataracts. She said in her practice, she'd only heard of one other case, and this was the first one she'd seen. So sometimes it's not so good being special, right? Sucks a little. But she said she'd call up and she'd make an appointment for the operation. Said she wanted to see us one more time the day before. So we went home. Now, my son Danny, as opposed to the other two kids, never complained about anything in his entire life. Anything that happened, he rolled with it. Everything was fine with him. So, and so he did with this. So now we're scheduled to come down. We come down for the second visit. And she said, well, now the right eye is completely covered. The left eye is about a third. She said it's really moving very quickly. And it's a good thing that we're going to go in and do this. She also said she'd called my insurance company. And she said they're only going to pay about half what I normally charge. But since your son is so unique, I'm going to waive my fee and accept what they're paying. So sometimes being special is a good thing. So we came back. So the next morning, we were going to come down and arrive about noon. It takes about 2 hours to drive down from where we were. So we're getting ready early in the morning, and the phone rings, and the doctor says that the hospital has just notified her that they don't have a bed available for Dan. And she said, now we can either reschedule, or if you want to take the chance, you can drive down, and I'll keep trying to get to your room. And I told her, well, I don't want to jerk my son around, like a yo-yo on this. He's psyched up for it now. And so if you think there's a chance, we're going to come down. And we did, and we drove down. We got there. I forget the name of the hospital. It was an old building with high ceilings and thick plaster walls. And instead of having a counter for admissions, they just had a window. And we went up to the window, and I gave them the name, and they said, no, we don't have any bed available. So I called the doctor, and she said, they've got a bed. They just don't know it yet. So, have a seat. So I sat down. About 5 or 10 minutes later, the lady at the window called us and sent us upstairs to our room. The room could have been a suite if it was in a newer hospital, but it was double wide. We had the room. Dan had his bed over here. We had 2 chairs over here. It could have been 2 rooms. Huge place. We found out later that what had happened was that my doctor, who is a pediatric ophthalmologist, which is a specialty within a specialty, had given a lecture a week or 2 before at the hospital for all the doctors. But the chief of surgery hadn't made the lecture. He'd been busy with something else. So she called him up and said, I will come to your office and deliver my lecture word for word just for you if you get this kid a room. So I don't know, maybe they moved somebody into a closet. I didn't ask. But Danny got his room. We were getting settled in when this was a teaching hospital, and we were getting settled in, and this gaggle of interns came around, and I would like to take credit for this next part, but it was the wife who said, don't let them come in here. She said, they'll scare Danny, all these white coats. And so I leapt to my feet, like any husband who's just been cattle prodded into activity, and ran up there and said, you've got the chart, you can see the kid. My wife and I will answer any questions, but you're not coming in the room. And I think 1 or 2 of the interns was a little disappointed. I think they were hoping they could look at him and say, oh, he's got orphan Annie syndrome or something like that. I just made that up. That's it. But no, they had to stay out there. And I was a little disappointed because all these bright young medical minds did not come up with a single original question. Everything was the stuff I'd already answered for Dr. Parrott, that there was no history in the family, he had had no accidents, he had had no illnesses, no explanation for this whatsoever. He went in the next morning for the surgery. I was, in all this, I was not overly concerned about the cataracts themselves because we were taking charge of it. We were doing something about it, and I had absolute faith in the doctor. I was not concerned about the surgery because I had worked in hospitals, and the safest place you will ever be is on an operating table. They've got everything they need to keep you going. What I was concerned about was the anesthesia, because on adults it's just a matter of body mass. With kids it's very tricky because they don't have much. And so I was concerned about that, but the doctor assured me that this doctor, that's just anesthetist, had been someone she'd worked with many times and had even anesthetized her mother when she needed an operation, so I had to take her word for that. Danny came out of the operation in good condition, so turns out I didn't have to be worried about anything. He was fine. We took him home, gave him a little Cabbage Patch doll, which were popular then, with an eye patch. And then we came back a few weeks later, and we had the other eye done. Came back for an exam after those bandages were taken off, and was told that it was interesting that he could see a lot of things. He said if this had happened to an adult, everything would be blurry. But that kids have a very pliable mind, and he could make sense out of the things he saw. And it was kind of interesting to her. But she said, we're going to have to give him glasses. And I said, well, what about implants? I'd just been reading about all that stuff. And she said, at that time, 1985, they were new. And she said, we are not putting implants in anybody under 80 years old because we don't know how long they're going to last. We don't know what the effects, long-term effects are going to be. She said, wait 10 years or so, and then we'll look into it again. So we took him home, and now the glasses, like I said, Danny never complained, and he's wearing these glasses that are, an inch thick, very cartoonishly large, and that's what he had all the way through school. In the course of time, wife and I divorced, and I realized one day that Danny was about to age off my insurance. See, one of the good things about being my age is that you get to know the end of the story. That's the only good thing about being my age. But so he was about to age off, and I called his mother, and I said, take him to the doctor and see about those implants. And she did, and they had the operation, and they were not only good, he passed an Army physical when he enlisted. And not only the Army, he was in the 82nd Airborne jumping out of airplanes. He went to Iraq and participated in the capture of Saddam Hussein. This year, he is eligible for retirement from the military. So we had a happy ending thanks to good insurance and an excellent doctor, and I just wish everybody had that.